This is the story of 8 men who, in the January of 1955, left London docks in the Norsel, a small Norwegian sealing vessel, to make the 9,000-mile journey to the great white continent, the Antarctic. For these men, it has not been an easy decision. There's a lot they will leave behind. They will notice even the small things, trees and grass. That has gone with their last contact with civilization, Port Stanley, the small, peat-smoky capital of the Falkland Islands. The ship docked here for 3 or 4 days, as this is the headquarters of the organization of which this team of men are only a part, the Falkland Islands Dependencies Survey. Their offices are at Government House. From here, the link is formed between the network of bases in the Antarctic and the rear base in London. These men are preparing to implement a program of research and discovery in that area of the Antarctic claimed by the British government, the Falkland Islands Dependencies. This area of land, covering more than 1 million square miles, includes the Graham Land Peninsula and the Weddell Sea area. But now, the Norsel has arrived in Antarctic waters. There before them is that vast and mysterious wilderness of rock and snow and ice. The mountains rise sheer from the sea, broken and precipitous, relieved only by the great slow-moving glaciers. Somewhere along this coast, one of the rare low-lying areas of land must be found. Here the bases are built. Sometimes they will be on the mainland itself, at other times on the off-lying islands, but all of them strung out along the west coast of Graham Land, for here there are the offshore winds, which every year will blow away the winter's sea ice, so making the bases accessible to the relief ship. Isolated from each other, they are manned by 4 to a dozen men, depending upon the nature of their work, and husks will usually be needed for transport, if there is a surveyor or geologist operating. The Norsel will visit these bases on the way down, but ultimately her destination is further south, beyond the Antarctic Circle, where a new base is to be established. But here they encounter a new difficulty, sea ice, that in these latitudes may often remain throughout the whole year. It is easily navigable when it is loose and broken, but when tight and compact, the laborious task of carving a passage begins. Finally, they move into clear water again. A site is found. It is an island first discovered by the French explorer, Dr. Charcot, and named by the British Graham Land expedition of 1930. The men work from early morning until on the final day after midnight. There are 100 tons of stores to be unloaded and carried across to the base site. Horseshoe Island. Unloading begins straight away. The ship must leave within 3 days. It is March now, early autumn in the Antarctic. Already a thin skim of fresh ice forms on the sea during the nights. A sudden cold spell could trap the ship for the winter. It is also a race to get concrete foundations of the hut laid before the temperature becomes too low. So, while some unload, others commence work on the hut. For the first time since the world began, this island will be inhabited by man. Horseshoe Island. In the richness of this earth, just an outcrop of rock, desolate and deserted, 8 miles by 5, beyond the periphery of civilization. Not for thousands, but for millions of years it has lain, weathered by wind and ice and sea, inhabited only by a few Antarctic seabirds. In the beginning, the earth in labor, heaving, thrusting, seething, threw up its broken, grotesque outcrops. But with the passing of time, the internal fire subsided, the earth was mellowed and calm. The encircling seas began to corrode the savage, angular rocks. The tide ebbed and flowed. Continually, the waves worked against the shore, caressing into a calmness these tormented, fire-created shapes. Time was only a ceaseless coming and going of the seasons. In the twilight of the winter months, when the sun has disappeared beyond the mountains and the day is only a faint glow of light to the north, then all life is suspended. The constant rhythm of the sea is gripped and stilled, and in the silence the snows fall and cover the rocks. But with the spring, the sun returns. Everything is now a white, frozen wasteland. The high winds begin to lift the snow away. Patches of rock appear. Day by day, the sun rises higher in the sky, warming the rocks, melting the snows, forming trembling pools of fresh water. The sea ice, weakened by the sun and wind and tides, has cracked up. Only the edges of it now hang to the coastline. Massive icebergs, which have carved off from the glaciers, are carried out to sea, where they slowly melt away. The diurnal freezing and thawing of the water that penetrates the crevices of the rocks has split and cracked them, producing a tumbled mass of broken fragments. Again, the birds return. The island is no longer silent. Ever since man has roamed the surface of the earth, these rocks have lain deserted. For the 8 men left on Horseshoe, a winter has passed. The hut is complete, except for the few refinements, and the program of normal base work can begin. Around and within this small wooden building revolves the life of these men, isolated except by radio from the outside world.
We were a mixed bunch. Take Trevor Vinelot, for instance. At 25, he'd had a varied life, with jobs ranging from metropolitan policeman to trombonist in a jazz band. Before coming down, he'd been on a Norwegian sealer in the Arctic. Brian Kemp was the only one of us who'd been down before. He was our senior meteorologist. Our bunks were our home from home. This one belonged to our surveyor, Derek Searle. He was one of the 4 who was down for a couple of years. John Atkinson was our diesel mechanic, who proved to be our handyman around the hut, one of those people who could make something out of anything. The wireless operator, Gordon Farker, had previously been a navigator in the RAF. Our base leader and carpenter was Ken Gall. After army service in India, Ken had trained as an architect. Jim Exley had experience of polar work in Iceland. He was our geologist. As background to the scientific work of the base, there was the routine job of looking after ourselves. Cooking we used to take in turns, a week at a time, also with the household chores. This aspect of the life down here prompted some wit to call it a battle school for husbands. Our water supply came from blocks of snow compacted hard by the high winds. When cut, they were carried inside and melted down in the tank attached to the stove. Coal for the stove was stacked outside and brought into the hut when needed. To save room inside, we kept our sledging stores in a snow cave. A rubbish dump of tins, pathetic evidence of our reliance on extraneous food supplies, our only local food being from seals and penguins. We learned how to improvise and experiment, for instance repairing boots. There was no going down to the shop and buying a new pair, you just had to fall back on your own resources. Calamity hit us when we broke our only Doris Day record, but Trevor very ingeniously fixed it. When we ran out of spare vaporizers, which could have brought our sledging program to a standstill, Don did a very tricky job of drilling and tapping the old ones so they could be decarbonized. Being a comparatively small base, we had no doctor, so Ken took over the medical work. One of the most common complaints down here is toothache. The very low temperatures caused fillings to work loose, but a temporary stopping usually proves effective. Don was always making handy gadgets, such as this little snow saw for cutting snow blocks. To save wear and tear on our regular sledges, Jim made one of his own, modelled on the Greenland pattern. One of the most absorbing and interesting jobs is looking after the huskies. Although we all give a hand with this, Jim, our geologist, is mainly responsible. Here they live, tethered to their span. Their only moment of escape is when they go out sledging or when somebody takes them for a walk. but they seem to enjoy their restricted life and are naturally happy and affectionate creatures. At feeding time, however, traces of their wolfish inheritance come to the surface, and sometimes they will develop a strong disliking for a particular dog. Besides feeding, there is always the daily inspection for injuries or to find out when a bitch is on heat. Injuries can be very severe, especially if a fight occurs, a not infrequent event, for huskies left alone will fight until one of them is dead. If stitching is necessary, the dog is brought up to the hut. When a bitch comes on heat, Jim consults the dog records to sort out a good mate likely to produce a healthy litter and checks that there is no danger of inbreeding. The matchmaker then puts them together in an open run, and in 9 weeks we have our pups. For 3 weeks they are suckled by their mother and soon are given the run of the base, which is the only time during their lives they are free. This is an important period because it is then that the dog learns to trust and like the men who are to depend upon him as fellow travelers. When as a grown dog he begins to pull a sledge. The dogs are fed primarily on seal meat. The hunting of seal is mainly a summer activity, for it is then that the seals come onto the sea ice to enjoy the sunshine. It is an unpleasant job, especially as the seal is completely unaware of your intentions. Traditionally, it has no enemies out of the water, and unlike the Arctic seals, man is still a stranger to him. The killing is done as quickly as possible. Its jugular vein is cut, and within seconds it bleeds to death if the rifle shot has not killed it outright. It is then degutted while still warm, otherwise it will soon freeze up and become unmanageable. The stomach is cut open and its contents examined. Often the lining of the stomach is infested by parasites, which can be passed on to the huskies. To prevent the dogs getting hold of the offal, it is usually thrown into a tide crag. The seal is carried back to be cut up and added to the stockpile, which is being rapidly built up against the sparse winter months. Skin is flensed, as the seal has many other uses, apart from serving as dog food, for instance for fine-grained leather. It is washed in the sea before it is finally cured. The layer of blubber beneath the skin makes an excellent substitute for dubbin. It can be used as a fuel on a sledging journey, and seal's brains on toast are a welcome alternative to tinned meat. Each man on the base, apart from the general duties, has a specific job. Derek, our surveyor, had 2 main tasks. First was exploratory survey, which consisted of mapping vast areas of land never before visited by man, and secondly, a detailed survey of the island on a scale of 1 inch to the mile. A hydrographic survey is done primarily to assist the relief ship when it arrives. The handling of survey instruments can be a very cold business, and speed is essential. But of course, a great deal of work is done in the office. Closely allied to survey is the geological work. Whenever conditions permit, Jim sallies forth armed with his geological hammer. In the Antarctic as yet, no valuable mineral ores have been discovered in sufficient quantities to make their exploitation a practical proposition. But this aspect of a geologist's job is subsidiary to the more general work of extending man's knowledge of the nature of the Earth's crust, of collecting the data that will reveal how the Earth has assumed its present form. Of great assistance to the geologist and surveyor were the darkroom facilities. Panoramic and close-up photographs of rock formations were used by Jim. Photostats provided a quick method of reproducing maps. Unusual cloud formations could be recorded. There was no biologist amongst us, so it was often useful to be able to get shots of the occasional unidentified bird, or photographs of unusual biological occurrences. But of course, most photographs were of personal interest, photos we took at parties or when some amusing out-of-the-ordinary incident occurred. Meteorology is the third scientific activity of the base. Continuous 3-hourly observations were carried out night and day by a team of 3. Although the climate of the Antarctic may affect the weather conditions of the whole world, the data from which general deductions can be made is still limited. In order to get a more comprehensive picture, a series of permanent and semi-permanent bases have been established within the Antarctic and subantarctic regions by the nations actively interested in Antarctic research. Horseshoe Island constitutes a link in this encircling chain of met stations. It is only through the accumulation of a whole mass of minute data such as this that any comprehensive and reliable hypothesis can be made concerning the general behavior of the weather in this vast area of land. The benefits of this meteorological spadework will only be apparent in the distant future. The Met observations are transmitted to Port Stanley. This is over 1,500 miles away. The erratic weather conditions in the Antarctic often make regular and satisfactory communications difficult. From Port Stanley, it is disseminated throughout the world. The wireless operator Gordon Farker not only had to be able to operate, but also to install and maintain his massive equipment. It was certainly a full-time job, which not only included Met observations, but also administrative and personal correspondence.
Hey, Trevor!
Here's the school buildings. The advance party of the British Commonwealth Transantarctic Expedition in the Sela Theron are still making very slow progress.
But for all this, we needed power. This came from the powerhouse, the little world of Don Atkinson. And here, getting to grips with his 2 robot subjects, is our Minister of Fuel and Power himself. The diesel engines were only worked during the peak hours. At other times of the day, we had a 12-volt battery system. It was a hard and cold job building this shed, laying concrete beds in temperatures below freezing, working in the semi-darkness of the Antarctic winter. The hut was insulated by an outside layer of timber, rubberoid, then a 2-inch airspace, followed by felt, and finally plywood. The loft above served as a store, so that there was plenty of elbow room for bigger jobs, and jobs big and small always seemed to find their way in there. Bunk lights were probably Don's most popular innovation. He made them from bits of wood and porridge tins. While we worked, around us there was a new fascinating world to be discovered. As the sun returns and melts the snow, dry, colorful lichens and mosses appear. They cling to the high exposed rock, which, although windswept, receives most sunlight. They're the most primitive form of plant life, depending for their survival entirely on sun and water from the melting snow and the atmosphere. Down here, man's response to anything organic is accentuated by its very aridity. But if the extreme cold and lack of soil inhibit all but the most primitive forms of life on land, the sea has an abundance of organic matter. In winter, the protective covering of ice on the surface shuts off the water from exposure to the atmosphere and therefore prevents freezing. In this liquid state, it supports many strange specimens of marine life. All Antarctic birds are oceanic, as the icebound land supports no edible organism and there is no shallow intertidal zone for waders. This is the skua, a common bird on Horseshoe Island, especially if any seal meat is left exposed. Their chicks are very nervous and elusive, unlike the defending parent. The giant petrel's defense is more subtle. It ejects a foul-smelling stomach oil. The ecstatic cry of the mating tern signals the arrival of the Antarctic spring, and the black-backed gull, he just comes and goes. Of course, the most populous bird is the penguin. This is the Adelie, one of the smaller species, an inquisitive, querulous, and instinctively brave creature. They only come down here for the summer. They arrive already paired off to form rookeries, where they build their nests, lay and hatch their eggs, molt, and by March they're off again, northwards. An interesting aspect of the penguin is that there is no sharp differentiation between the sexes in their behavior. The male and female take it in turns to hunt for food and tend the nest. Although the Adelie is comical on land, in the water he is transformed and moves with incredible speed and agility. He is off to catch fish, which he regurgitates into the mouth of his chicks. This gesture is called head flagging. It is all part of the penguin's very highly developed and involved courtship ceremony. Although they live in large rookeries, their curiosity makes them inveterate travelers, either in groups or alone. These two in their wanderings have encountered another penguin, but a very frighteningly large one. It is an emperor. Standing about 3 feet high, it is the manner of a venerable old man. It is thought to be the oldest bird in existence, and is an important link between reptilian and bird life. It is the only bird that breeds entirely within the Antarctic Circle. It lays its eggs during the bitterly cold winter months, when the other penguins have gone to the warmer areas to the north. Because of this constant battle against nature, he is a cooperative and unaggressive bird, with a remarkably highly developed maternal instinct. This formal bow is a greeting. It is one of the many ceremonial gestures of this strange bird. And like all penguins, it is very inquisitive. The Weddell seal is one of the two most abundant species in the Antarctic. Because it lives near the coast, in areas normally free of killer whales, it has a very poorly developed sense of fear. It spends most of its time in the water, only coming onto the sea ice to breathe, sleep, and sunbathe. After a long period of gestation, it breastfeeds its pup for 7 weeks. But as early as the 3rd week, a pup is made to take to water, its normal home. It learns to gnaw itself a blowhole, an incredibly laborious task, especially during the winter when it is remembered that the sea ice is probably about 6 feet thick. The other main species is the crab-eater. In contrast to the rather cumbersome Weddell, it is extremely light and agile, nor is it as uncomprehending of danger for its enemy as the killer whale. Although it is often blemished by large scars, its skin would make a fine fur, but it is probably too remote to be ever commercially exploited. It feeds entirely on krill, a minute shrimp-like creature. It catches them by taking a mouthful of krill and water, then blowing out the water through its highly specialized, tight-fitting, cusped teeth and retaining the krill. The bloody mouth indicates that this bull has been fighting, but this is rare. Most of the time they're just sleepy, sensual and peaceable creatures. There was a third amphibious creature in the Antarctic. Don used to do this before breakfast, said it used to wake him up. We used to go skiing too. People often ask, what did you do down there? But it was surprising how little time there was for recreation, such as skiing and climbing. Our particular locality was a mountaineer's paradise. The main characteristic of climbing in the Antarctic is that you encounter ice conditions and fairly difficult climbs at a low altitude. But all this, the skiing and mountaineering, all the many base activities, merely form the background for the essential work down here. That is the sledging program. Each journey is part of an overall plan worked out by the base leader, surveyor and geologist. Ken gets together with the other two and they discuss the objectives, the route to be taken and who is to go on it. On this occasion it is Derek and Brian, so together they settle down to plan details. The preparation is a painstaking and thorough business. Dogs are measured up for new harnesses. These have to be made by hand. Rapidly worn rope traces have to be repaired and new ones spliced and sewn. Broken skis, tears in tents, carboned up primuses have to be overhauled. The first aid kit restocked, socks darned, and all the little things that might make the difference between success and failure. Every lashing, piece of patching, darning, splicing, every spare part, even the minutest item must be in working order. When you are miles from anywhere with only one man and 8 dogs as companions, it is these small things upon which your life can depend. Take, for instance, such a simple thing as a primus pricker. Our first winter sledging journey had to be abandoned because we hadn't got enough of them. Fortunately, back at the base, Don finally solved the problem by noticing that the stove cleaning brush had bristles about the same thickness. From then on, we mass-produced them. Fresh batteries and torches, paraffin to be filtered. There are many small things to be done, including finally the careful checking of each item before packing. And we always used to take the odd luxury item to break the monotonous diet. And when the first fine day arrives, we are ready. On a survey journey, the sledging party stops at intervals of about an hour. First, Derek checks the distance covered. Next, he records the position of the surrounding terrain in relation to himself by making a rough pencil sketch. He then takes a compass bearing on all prominent points, most of which he will have also sighted at the previous stop. Brian records them as he reads them out. Finally, he measures their angle of elevation. This eventually will enable him to know their height as well as their position. Met observations are synchronized with those back at the base. But work done, it's time for lunch. A welcome if frugal meal of a cup of cocoa, 3 biscuits and half a bar of chocolate. As evening approaches, they begin to look around for a campsite. In an area of offshore wind such as this, it is wise to be either on or near land. Usually we reckon to travel about 8 hours, but if we spot a seal, we stop earlier, so as to give the dogs a meal of fresh meat. The first job is to get the tent up. Speed is essential, for a wind can get up in a matter of minutes. This depends on a well-tried mutual understanding and perfect cooperation. The flaps are weighted down as quickly as possible, with spare boxes and snow. The huskies are unharnessed, and except when a bitch and a dog are together, are separated, so as to prevent fighting in the night. Then they are fed. This consists of a block of pemmican, a concentrated meat extract especially evolved for cold climates. A husky cannot work indefinitely on this diet, and the occasional meal of fresh seal meat is important. The inside man goes into the tent to arrange the ground sheet and sleeping bags. Meanwhile, the outside man reinforces the tent with snow, upturns the sledge and collects ice for brewing up a cup of tea. It's a great moment after a hard day's work to sit outside the tent on a fine evening and drink that cup of tea. It is a moment of suspended time when a person feels that sense of communion, of harmony, of being an integral part of the universe. So he can fix his exact position by the sun, Derek must know the time to 1/10 of a second. He does this with a small RBZ set, picking up a time signal from the United States. Then, with a theodolite, he records the sun's position. This done, it's in for supper. And so there they are, 2 men and 8 dogs, thousands of miles from civilization, in this vast and silent wilderness. But perhaps not entirely alone. It may be cold outside, but a tent is like a furnace within seconds when we get a primus going. As with the dogs, pemmican is the basis of the evening meal, the main meal of the day. It is followed by 3 biscuits, half a bar of chocolate, and a cup of cocoa. Derek has then to work out his sun observations and plot the day's journey on the slowly developing map. Then maybe they'll talk. Hard day's work, you feel tired. There's a sense of security and warmth, even if this is but a tenuous lining of canvas dividing you from the storm outside, for these tents, well looked after, can withstand even the fiercest storms. And so to bed, to sleep, to dream of snow maidens, and to look to the next day and new horizons. But no matter how much you enjoy the hard work, the interest and the excitement of a sledging journey, there is also another pleasure in homecoming, and that old base hut does seem like home after a journey. Maybe you've got a radio message waiting for you, and there are the stories to tell each other. Tonight it can blow as hard as it likes. But also, the mass of survey and meteorological readings taken in the field must now be tabulated, and the official report of the journey written, discussed, and eventually filed away.
And so the work goes on. The summer has passed its peak, and the sun no longer just circles the sky. The ice connecting them to the mainland has been broken up and carried out to sea. The penguins are beginning to molt. The young seals are on their own now, and will soon be disappearing beneath the sea ice for the winter. It is a year now since the ship left. An Argentine seaplane has been their only glimpse of the outside world during that time. It came over one bright Sunday morning, dipped its wings in king, and disappeared again. The season's work is nearly completed. Jim packs his rock specimens to be sent back to Birmingham University. Some of them will be returning home to take up their old jobs, but others will stay for a second year, and there will be new arrivals. And so it is that these small organizations, such as the Falkland Islands Dependencies Survey, which fringe the Antarctic continent, slowly accumulate the wealth of scientific data and provide the valuable groundwork for great projects such as the Transantarctic Expedition. This is a constructive and worthwhile job. And when all the petty political disputes which exist even in this remote part of the world have been resolved, this, the result of man's quest to understand the world he lives in, will remain. In the words of Fridtjof Nansen, man wants to know, and when he ceases to do so, he is no longer man.